the Chicago Bears are a very, very unfortunate franchise, but maybe, just maybe, they have a chance to make it a little bit better this year. So let's look into what they can do to actually build off of the very few pieces they have left. What's up, guys? I'm Tyler Coker, and I'm your host for today's episode of Today with Tyler. I hope you enjoy. First, once again, we'll start with their free agents. Their free agents include Allen Robinson, went to the Rams, Akeem Hicks, Andy Dalton, Jimmy Graham, Tashawn Gibson, the safety, Damian Williams, the running back, and Alec Ogletree, the linebacker. A good mix of starters and non-starters that maybe make an impact and maybe don't. A couple of them left, such as Dalton and Allen Robinson, and Akeem Hicks still hasn't been signed. But in the end, I think they're looking to just make a new, young, potential-filled team versus picking up veterans who are good, but in the end are going to be too old for the successes of the Chicago Bears if their rebuild really works. Going to their offense, Justin Fields just wasn't ready for the NFL stage, and his arrogance before the season showed. He didn't supply much optimism for Chicago, but they have to pray that he has to turn out, because otherwise they really are in a bad situation. It certainly doesn't help that the Bears were awful around him, and that definitely built into his struggles. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying it's all his fault. But in the end, he didn't do that much, and his team did more to hurt him than help him. Let's look into all those issues. First, the Bears wide receiver core turned out to be worse than anyone could have expected, since Robinson never got the ball. Darnell Mooney had a pretty solid season, but he wasn't worth all the hype that Chicago fans gave him, and they pretended that he would be this great wide receiver one. And Jakeem Grant proved to be the only Bears player who really gave 100% effort in every single snap. He definitely impressed me, but the rest of the team really didn't. I have a lot of respect for Grant because of it, and I would love to see a change in scenery for him to maximize his potential and actually let him be a good player. But the Bears are going to bear. Their tight end room was disappointing, as Cole Kmet really hasn't lived up to his potential from the draft, and their next two, Jimmy Graham and Jesse James, are simply washed-up name guys who probably should have retired a little bit ago. The run game, which Chicago wanted to lean on, was average at best since there wasn't really any threat of passing for them to have to worry about and thin out the defense for. The combo of David Montgomery, Khalil Herbert, and Damian Williams all worked in Tariq Cohen's absence and did pretty well, but once again, defensive scheming really made it easy to shut down the run game early. The run game wasn't helped by the offensive line either, and Jason Peters, of course, had a good season playing as a raucous left tackle, but Tevin Jenkins was kind of a bust this year for a tackle drafted, and the line still has many full holes, and they have just as many as they had before the draft last year, which is a horrible situation to be in. Right guard James Daniels had an acceptable year, but left guard Cody Whitehair, offensive center Sam Mustipher, and right tackle Larry Broom all really struggled, which helped made Fields just look like really bad, because he has a desire to hold the ball forever, but you can't do that when your line can't even block for a minimum check down. Going on to their defense, their secondary played at a marginal level this season, but in some way was saved by their box. Their box did very poorly. Teams didn't pass often, but when they did, they allowed nearly 7 yards per pass attempt, which is a very, very high number. Artie Burns was rated the highest in the entire secondary by PFF, but he wasn't even a starter, leaving the unfortunate seasons of corners Duke Shelley and Jalen Johnson, and strong safety Eddie Jackson and Tashawn Gibson Jr. as a starting four. Combined with the ineffectiveness of the post-Kyle Fuller secondary was bad linebacker play. Janny Trevethanen and Roquan Smith both played pretty poorly, doing anything but cementing the middle of the field for Chicago. Luckily, there is some upside for this defense because not only do they have talent in the secondary, but Robert Quinn had a great year, and Khalil Mack did too, but now he's gone, so hopefully they can use that pick for something. And while they weren't as horrifying as they once were, they still had really effective seasons. Their defensive line was also a mix of good and bad, as Akeem Hicks had yet another great season, but Eddie Goldman and Bilal Nichols couldn't hold the rest of the line. The Chicago Bears' defense was kind of a disappointment, since we've seen so much greatness from Chicago defensively that we've kind of come to expect it, so those high expectations led it to a very similar breakdown as some people like Carolina or Washington. So their important positional needs are offensive tackle, offensive center, linebacker, defensive tackle, and corner. And an ideal draft might go something with getting a tackle in the second, like Abraham Lucas, Daniel Falele, Nicholas Petit-Frere from Ohio State, and then using another second-round pick that they got for Khalil Mack would be to get another edge rusher because you need one now. They certainly need to build that, but they could also go with one of these depth wide receivers, maybe even getting Christian Watson if they're lucky. He would be a great fit to very easily take over the spot of Allen Robinson. And then in the third, taking someone like Quay Walker, the Georgia linebacker. It's how you can kind of rebuild a little bit, because their defense struggled and they need to focus on O-line. But it's also important that you can get a good defense to back up Justin Fields in the case that he does do okay. So Chicago is in a rough spot where they're not good, but they're not bad either, in the sense that they have talent. But in the end, it's going to come down to, can their coaches finally fix the very blatant issues that plague this team? Thank you for listening to the Chicago Bears.